prompt joiners tonight. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to allow those who RSVP to join us. So we'll probably be starting around 6:05 or thereabouts. So just please sit tight. And we'll jump into it soon. Thanks, everyone.
Hi. Good
evening.
Good evening. Hey, can't hear me. I just see the email. I was wondering if you were going to send out the presentation. No.
The presentation will be posted on the envisionmountvernon.com website after.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, everyone, it's 6:05. We have 38 participants right now, so I figure we'll get started and people will filter in. We can share the presentation. All right. Again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final outreach event for the Mount Vernon Comprehensive Plan. Very excited to be at this point. My name is James Rouse. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Planning and Community Development who has been leading this charge to adopt Mount Vernon's first comprehensive plan since 1968. So it's been about 57 years since our last comprehensive plan, even though it's not our first endeavor to updating that comprehensive plan. This is the farthest we have gotten, and we're very excited to be at this point to get across the finish line this coming fall. So tonight, what we are doing is we're intending to present you kind of a high level presentation of our draft comprehensive plan, which for those of you who are new, we have done this plan in two different phases. The first phase, which began in early 2023, focused on the downtown, which we call phase one, which was a 50 block area, so surrounding City Hall, Mount Vernon East train station, Mount Vernon Hospital, with Gramerton and South Fourth Avenues as the spine. That was adopted last year by the City Council in the form of a downtown vision report, which I encourage you, if you have not seen it yet, to go online and check that out. You could always go to envisionmtvernon.com and envisionmountvernon.com to check out updates if you have not as of yet. So tonight, what we're going to be doing is going over the higher level concepts of and chapters of this plan to share with you what we've heard as a team and as a city from you. We've had over 30 outreach events over the last 2 years, which is a lot for a municipality to engage, but we wanted to make sure that as many cohorts were represented as possible in this plan. You know, even though we're only 4.4 square miles, we are a community that's been getting back on our feet after COVID and after some, unfortunate happenstances back in 2019, related to our finances and some changes in government. And so what we're looking to achieve tonight is to show you the culmination of those 30 events. And it's not really a working session like our community conversations that we've had. If you've partook in any of those, this is more kind of, here's what we heard, and just try to garner your reactions and making sure that we have heard you correctly. So there'll be an opportunity towards the end for just some Q&A towards that. But what our intention is to use this final opportunity to hear about those tweaks to the comp plan with the intent of wrapping things up by the end of August to present to the City Council during the fall. So that's going to be a couple of months worth of a process where we'll have public hearings with the City Council, and then refer to our planning board and the Westchester County Planning Board to go through the shortened environmental review process for the City Council to adopt before the end of the year. So it's a very exciting time. But before we dive into it, I'd just like to introduce our team here, as well as some electeds who have joined us. Joining us from the Department of Planning and Community Development is Deputy Commissioner Marla Molina, Deputy Commissioner Pam Tarlow, Assistant Commissioner Lucas Herbert, our GIS Coordinator Amelia Zino, our Senior Planner Will Highland, and our Executive Secretary Tamiko Graham Ortara. Let's see if I missed anyone from our team. Doesn't look like it. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to our consultant team. So the team that we have here was we've made some changes from phase one. Phase two, we carried some team members over, but we've put together a very robust team that's been working very hard on all aspects of the comprehensive plan. First, we have our lead consultant, Pat Cleary from Cleary Consulting. We have Peter Farrow from AKRF, who's focused on environmental and zoning. We have Adam Bosch from Hudson Valley Patterns for Progress, who has been tackling our housing, economic development, and government efficiency chapters. And then we have our outreach team, which consists of BRS, Brownfield Redevelopment Solutions, represented by Mike Colber and Lynn Avney Brooks Avney. And we have a former EBO from Creative Urban Alchemy who focused on youth outreach. I notice we have Councilmember Javon Boxhill with us, which before we
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, if you'd like to say a few words, Councilmember.
I'm just here listening. I might have some questions at the end. Thank you for putting this together. I mean, it's a long time coming and a lot of work has gone in behind this. So thanks the team, thank you and everyone on the team for, their hard work and continue work on this project. So we're looking forward to the end product. So thank you again.
Thank you, council member. For those who don't know, Councilmember Box Hill is the chair of our Finance and Planning Committee, so he's our chairperson of the city council. Our honorable mayor, Sean Patterson Howard, will be joining us later. She contacted me to inform us that she's in transit, but when she's here, we'll have her say a few words. But without any further delay, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our consultant team, and we're going to turn it over to Michael Colbert from BRS to kick things off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Colbert from BRS. I'm a director of planning for the organization, and it's been a really intense few months getting this comp plan together. We're really excited to present to you what we've done so far. So if we can go to the next slide. What we're here to do is talk about what we heard through our past meetings and workshops, the outreach we've done, talk about how your input is shaping the comprehensive plan, and talked about the conversations that we've had with all of you. This is a preview of what's to come with the comp plan. So the idea is we want to give you, even before the plan is out, we wanted to provide an opportunity to share about what's going to be in the plan, serve as a preview to the plan. So when the plan comes out, you guys know what's in it, know how to review the plan, understand what's going on with it, understand what the review process is. And also to extend our public comment period so that you have an opportunity starting now to start providing feedback into the elements that are going to the plan. We didn't want to wait till the plan is actually out. We wanted to give you an opportunity to start getting your voices heard even before we finish the final plan. So for our meeting today, virtual meetings for a large crowd can be challenging. So we're asking everybody to stay on mute. We're going to be using the chat today for all the questions and comments. We want to use that tool to manage the meeting to make sure that we're not all talking over each other. So we're asking everybody. You can start right now if you want to, putting questions and comments into the chat. Feel free to do so throughout the meeting, and we will be reading off the questions at the end of the meeting for Q&A. Please be respectful of everybody in the chat. I know in on-rent meetings, sometimes things don't feel real, but we're still your neighbors. Please remain focused on the topics of the meeting. We are focused today on the comprehensive plan, so we want to stay on topic for that. And if for technical issues, please send a direct message to our host. So either to Marlon Molina or Amelia Zeno. Please send any technical questions as a direct message to them. Okay. So our master plan for the city of Mount Vernon is going to be 6 chapters long. It starts with an introduction. Then we have a taking stock chapter, which is really about the existing conditions of the city of Mount Vernon. Building a vision talks about the process through which we develop the comprehensive plan and especially all the community engagement that we have done. And we really want to highlight in that chapter, as well as in the meeting today, what we heard in all of our community engagements and how that translated into the plan, to show that line between what you said in all these meetings and the plan that we created. Placemaking takes visual stock of the city, and how the city looks and how we'd like it to look. Then we get into core concepts, which is the meat of the plan, where we go into our thematic areas and build out all of the elements of our plan. Finally, chapter 6 is implementation. This is in some ways, the most important part of the plan because this says, for all these ideas that we've expressed in the comp plan, how do we do it? How do we put this into the ground? So, and that's our implementation chapter. Our plan represents 12 thematic themes in the master plan. So you can see these 12 on screen. What's important to understand is this is the order that we go through it in the comp plan. So this is the order that you'll see when you're reading the comp plan, you'll see it in this order. This is not the order that we're presenting in Things in today because different sections were presented by different consultants and put together by different consultants. So we're having each of those consultants present one at a time on the elements of the master plan that they wrote. All of the consultant teams are going to be presenting today. So we had extensive community engagement as part of this process. A lot of it was done as part of a phase one community engagement where the city was really focused on downtown Mount Vernon as a core focus area. There was a downtown master plan that was created as part of phase one of this project. Um, we started this phase two of the project in August of 24 with targeted community engagements. So we had 4 community engagements that were really targeted at communities that were underrepresented in phase one of the planning process, especially youth, seniors, Spanish language community, and our industrial community in Mount Vernon, which makes up an important part of our workforce and our economic capacity for Mount Vernon. So those were 4 community conversations. Each one was done a little bit differently, and we'll go through each one of those and talk about what was done and what we heard. There were also 2 citywide community conversations that were done in January of this year, and we'll go through them as well. But we'll start with our youth community conversations, and that was led by Creative Urban Alchemy and Ifoma Ibo. So Ifoma?
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Ifoma Ebo. I'm principal of Creative Urban Alchemy, which is a Brooklyn-based urban design and planning studio. If you can go back 2 slides, please. And we center equity and justice in urban design and planning, and we supported BRS in with the community engagement by focusing on youth engagement. Next slide. So in our youth engagement, which was over the course of last summer, from August to about early October, we engaged young people, particularly between the ages of 15 and 24. We first had a roundtable discussion with them where we asked them about the challenges and opportunities and what they wanted to see for the future of Mount Vernon. We then trained them in public engagement and crafting of surveys. We then hired them as a part of our staff. So some of the youth that you see in this picture were then hired as a part of our team and helped us to develop a survey that we then used for the general public. And they also helped us in engaging the general public in a few pop-up engagements. Next slide. So one of them was City Fest, which was at Hartley Park. And we used some of the imagery that were created with the youth. So we had an artificial intelligence workshop with them where they generated images that represented the future vision, future ideas they wanted to see for Mount Vernon and different parts of Mount Vernon. And we then printed those images and used them to engage the general public to get their thoughts and ideas on the future vision images that were created by young people. So that's what you see here in Hartley Park during City Fest in September. Next slide. We also took some of the young people, as you see in the image on the left-hand side, we took them and we did canvassing. We canvassed Sunset Hill and Fleetwood, Lincoln Avenue Co-op, Sanford Boulevard, Retail Corridor, Leverster Towers, Ebony Gardens, West Mount Vernon. These were the neighborhoods we canvassed. We went with the young people and facilitated these surveys and facilitated 160 surveys across those different neighborhoods. And so much of the feedback that I'm sharing today is feedback from the young people, but also feedback that came out of the pop-up engagements. Next slide. Our final engagement was a public engagement was during Pumpkin Fest, also at Hartley Park in October. So during the engagements, we covered the themes that Michael shared earlier, and these are some of the images. So the images that you see here are the images that were generated by the young people using artificial intelligence. And so these are some of the ideas that they came up with that they felt like they wanted to see for Mount Vernon. So for land use, zoning, and housing, they wanted to see parking lots being repurposed to be more activated, streets as destinations, so more active use of public streets, a diversity of housing types from single to multifamily. Next slide. And so this slide, which I'll have for every theme, really highlights how the plan that has just been completed, the draft, how it aligns with some of the feedback that came from both the young people and from people in public engagement that you've seen on the previous images. So based on the feedback that we got from young people on housing and land use, the plan itself has a City of Homes version 2.0 framework that really calls for diversity of housing types, from co-ops to townhomes to triplexes and micro units. It directly responds to the desire for that young people express to have a diversity of housing types. It also recommends to eliminate exclusionary zoning, which is essentially zoning that only allows for an area to have single family homes and open up opportunities to legalize small scale multifamily housing. That also reflects the youth's desire for mixed income neighborhoods. And it also calls for integrating housing with essential services and transit. So making sure that housing is more accessible and connected to homes. And that was something that the young people also expressed they wanted to see. Next slide. Now, with the theme related to economic development and employment, many of the young people expressed that they wanted to see more training in different fields, particularly medical fields, small businesses, small community shops, workforce development. The quotes that you see in these slides are quotes that are directly from some of the young people that were a part of our workshop, and just the things that they expressed that they wanted to see, and we translated into recommendations. Next slide. So in alignment with some of these desires by young people and from the public engagement, which you see in the quotes, there are some of the quotes from public engagement. The plan itself calls for an equitable workforce ecosystem that particularly targets underrepresented youth and BIPOC communities, focusing on internship, sector-based training, and wraparound supports. It also calls for youth-oriented employment pathways, such as food truck courts, markets, creative entrepreneurship zones, and it also emphasizes workforce alignment with local zoning so that jobs are close to where the young people are living. So this is all of these, sort of recommendations are really in direct connection to what young people express in terms of having more accessible opportunities for employment. Next slide. With youth engagement, you can see in some of the images here that the young people expressed that they wanted to see trampoline parks and water parks, sky zones. I mean, in short, they wanted more active Mount Vernon, so they didn't have to leave Mount Vernon to have fun. They wanted to have more fun where they live. And you can see that in the quote here where someone expressed they wanted to see a trampoline park or a sky zone. Next slide. So in direct alignment to that, the plan proposes youth sports infrastructure to make Mount Vernon more of a regional destination to play and to compete with other areas. It also recommends to support accessible free recreational amenities, improved parks, splash pads, pop-up play spaces on underutilized parcels. So again, this is directly connected to young people wanting to activate parking lots and underused pieces of land. And then cultural placemaking recommendations that focus on youth-focused programming, mural arts, music-based activations. So really just as this is directly reflecting the youth desires for vibrant, inclusive public spaces, but in a way that can champion young people as leaders through creative placemaking. Next slide. And so the young people also expressed desires for their educational facilities and institutions, particularly improvements to libraries and, diversification of school programming that centers the arts. Next slide. And then in direct alignment with this, the plan calls for an investment in the Denzel Washington School of the Arts to envision Mount Vernon as a center for creative and cultural excellence, cross-sector collaborations between schools, community centers, cultural institutions to expand mentorship, improving accessibility to opportunities for young people, and access to safe and supportive facilities. It also calls for inclusive education and youth empowerment is underscored through the plan itself, and promoting young people as stewards and leaders in civic planning processes, very much in the same way that we trained young people, hired them as a part of our team, and they then went out to engage the broader public. We want to use the comprehensive plan as a tool to support that kind of work across Mount Vernon. Next slide. So finally, with infrastructure and transportation, the young people expressed that they wanted to see better improvement in the efficiency and effectiveness of their transportation systems, so reliable buses, safer streets so they can ride their bicycles in the streets, greener and more accessible streets, particularly for people who have physical impediments. Next slide. And these are just, again, some of the quotes that came from people through public engagement. But in alignment with that, the comprehensive plan expresses a safe and equitable mobility strategy that directly addresses youth concerns through targeted corridor improvements, sidewalk repairs, addressing accessibility and transit enhancement. It also calls for micromobility options like bike share and shuttles to make transportation around Mount Vernon, to diversify that transportation and for young people in particular who lack car access. It also includes pedestrian public realm improvements like lighting, trash cans, benches, prioritizing areas particularly that young people have expressed were unsafe or under maintained. So again, this is all sort of like highlighting that the desires and needs that were expressed by young people and expressed by people through the public engagement were definitely listened to and integrated into the plan. Next slide. I will pass it back to Michael, who will share on the other engagement efforts.
Thank you so much. So our next engagement was also from September and October.
Mike,
November.
before you continue, you've been joined by Mayor Sean Harrison Howard and Councilmember Thompson. Just want to give them an opportunity to say hello.
Absolutely.
Hi. No, I don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation. I just want to be here and be a participant. Thank you for the team. Thank you to the staff, and thank you to our residents and stakeholders who are here tonight. Looking forward to the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilman?
Yes, yes, likewise. I'm just here to gather the information. I'm so appreciative of everyone on the call. I see 66 people there, so I'm just appreciative. I'm just here for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, November of 24, we had our meeting with older residents in Mount Vernon, and this was a really fantastic engagement because what we got to do is tap into the long-time knowledge of the city of Mount Vernon that the seniors have of the community, and especially dipping into the knowledge of how the city has evolved over the past 50, 60 years, what's changed, what's stayed the same, and where the city is going. So if you go to the next slide, one thing that we heard a lot about from our seniors is about the importance of South Fourth Avenue in Mount Vernon. This was really at the center of a lot of people's memories of Mount Vernon, a place where they used to go on Sundays with their families, to go shopping, to go for community events. And there's a desire to bring back South Fourth Avenue as an important center for Mount Vernon. So this translates into the master plan through a call to reconnect Gramerton and South Fourth Avenue under a unified identity, and have the strong commercial aspect of Gramerton connect to South Fourth Avenue to try and build that up as a commercial corridor and bring back that important part of our community. We also heard about how neighborhoods should reflect family friendliness. We heard about the importance of prioritizing historic preservation and affordable high-quality housing, improving roads to be safer, and a lot about local dining, shopping, and entertainment options. So from that, we get the planet calling for activating public spaces with art, music, and family-friendly programming, protecting historic buildings through preservation tools, locating affordable senior housing near or walkable, transit-friendly neighborhoods, adding safe ADA crosswalks to our neighborhoods, and creating space for local entertainment businesses. We heard a lot about the need for things like a bowling alley or a movie theater in Mount Vernon, places for people to have an entertainment option that's in the city as a critical part of Mount Vernon social life. So that was we addressed that in the plan. So for Spanish speakers, we held a tighter focus group for them in December of 24. So we really wanted to be able to dive deep into the particular concerns of our Spanish speaking population, and how that differs from the rest of the population, what they see, what's unique about life, and especially interaction with governments for Spanish speakers. So next slide. So, nope, this went backwards. Next one. There we go. So here we heard a lot about how there's a need for an expansion of recreation opportunities, expansion for creative spaces for people, a lot about cultural life for Spanish-speaking populations, that there's a need for more cultural events that are target their culture, cultural institutions. We heard that since the decline of the Dominican Club, especially, it needs to be a central hub for Spanish-speaking life in Mount Vernon. There's also a need to support local businesses to expand growth and opportunities. Again, providing affordable housing options was something that we heard pretty consistently throughout the planning process, that people are really value that Mount Vernon is a more affordable community within Westchester County, and there's a desire to hang on to that. People want to be able to live here affordably. Um, we heard that there's a need to increase parking availability, especially by Mount Vernon West, and fix roads and sidewalks to improve pedestrian safety. And that was a big focus of that meeting. We heard about the importance of walkability for the Spanish-speaking populations who really, is more likely to depend on that as a means of transport in their day-to-day lives. So all of this got translated into the plan. Next, we had our two citywide conversations, and this was done with a very different structure. This was an open tabling structure as opposed to the more traditional meeting conversation. So in this meeting, we had 5 tables. If you go to the next slide, we have a map. And we had 5 tables that represented 5 thematic parts of the city. Sanford Boulevard, Columbus Avenue, East Lincoln Avenue, West Mount Vernon, and Fleetwood. For each of those areas, we set up a table to get feedback specifically about these critical areas of the city. These were areas of the city where we needed more guidance about what the future of these neighborhoods look like. And so each of these tables was a little bit different. So for Sanford Boulevard, we were looking at how people spend their money in the neighborhood. And we actually had Legos for people to provide an opportunity for people to demonstrate their shopping preferences. On Columbus Avenue, we're doing a flyover of the transportation in the neighborhood to understand how people travel around the area. For Fleetwood, we used a preferences board for people to put their preferences for different amenities that they'd like to see in the neighborhood. So each of these was treated a little bit differently in order to get feedback. We also had a table at each of these presentations from New City Parks, specifically focusing on park development in the city and what should be done with there. And then there was a final table that was hosted that was focused on citywide issues. So this one provided an opportunity for people to talk about any of the other neighborhood in the city. We didn't want to ignore anybody, so people had an opportunity to talk about any neighborhood in the city that they like at that citywide table. It also provided an opportunity for people to provide feedback on issues that are truly citywide. So things like air pollution in this city is something that affects everybody. It's not just one neighborhood. Governance is something that affects everybody, not just one particular neighborhood. So we want to be able to get feedback on those citywide issues. So next slide. So what we heard a lot at this meeting, obviously. We had several hundred, over 1,000 comments that we had to sort through from all of our residents here. And as you can imagine, some people were very uniform about what they wanted, and in some cases we had conflict, and that's okay. It's okay for everybody to not have exactly the same vision of the city. Our job as our consultant team is to try and understand what is a strong preference that is uniformly held and what are issues that are contentious among people and that we have to sort through. So a good example of that would be on Lincoln Avenue, where we got mixed feedback on expanding Lincoln Avenue as a commercial corridor, whether the commercial corridor should be extended further out from the existing corridor. And that's okay that we get that feedback. We understand that people have different visions. So as our consultants team, the way we handle something like this is that we try and identify the other values that were identified as part of the planning process and the other preferences that we heard. And then we try and take this feedback and try and build towards those values. It also means that maybe we're open to change in some of these areas, but we should be cautious about it. That, we can experiment a little bit on these areas, but not go too far. And so, some things that where there's a strong community preference, we want to run hard in that direction. And some things maybe we're open to change about it, but we want to go slow. One thing we heard consistently was that residents want more parks in the city and a fair distribution of green spaces across all neighborhoods. There's access from certain parts of the city, but it's not all over the city. We heard pretty consistently that current transportation systems are not equipped to support new housing and population growth. And that's very much tied to, for example, the concern about Mount Vernon West. So we heard that there were concerns about density around Mount Vernon West, but it wasn't about the presence of high-rise buildings itself necessarily. People weren't addressing necessarily to the towers themselves. It's that the local infrastructure right now, there are concerns that it can't sustainably handle those towers, that there's especially the walkability of the neighborhood means that you can't really walk around from there well enough. And it means that you're more car dependent on there and you're not supporting people the way they need to be in a denser neighborhood. So this is really important feedback that we got about how the city should be growing and developing over time and what's needed before some of that growth, that development can happen. Fleetwood was another interesting example where we heard that people wanted that to maintain that residential character of the neighborhood overwhelmingly, but that doesn't mean that you can't have commercial that's in the neighborhood to support that. So people were very happy to have a neighborhood cafe or a small dining option that would support the residential character of their neighborhood. It doesn't have to be 100% residential. You can have small businesses that support the residential character of the neighborhood, and people were very excited about that as a possibility. So our last engagement was with our industrial community. And I'll be very honest, we had a first try at this meeting that was supposed to be a morning virtual meeting, and it failed. And sometimes as a planners, that happens, is that, we have a meeting that doesn't work out so well. And we tried again. So we wound up moving it to an in-person meeting and having an in-person event, and that was much more successful. We had a mapping exercise at the meeting where we looked at how the industrial area is laid out and people's perceptions of the industrial area, and we got a lot of good feedback there. Overwhelmingly, there was a common perception that the regulatory burdens that we have in Mount Vernon, the regulatory needs that we have in terms of environment and protection, zoning, they need to go through the process for development. People understood that this is a need for Mount Vernon. Nobody was talking about getting rid of our regulations and just so free people can just do whatever we want. People understood it. But the overwhelming desire was to make that system more streamlined, more clear, and more functional so that people could work their way through the development process and through the regulatory process for starting up new businesses, building new buildings, all those types of things, and work their way through the system in a manner that was efficient and clear and predictable without surprises, so that people can do the work that they need to do and get it done in a reasonable amount of time. So let's go to the next slide. And this takes us to the themes of our comprehensive plan. So next up, we're going to have Pat Cleary start going to the next themes of the plan.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. So I'm going to kick off our discussion of the 12 themes that Michael introduced earlier. So our first theme, next slide, is celebrating and preserving Mount Vernon's historic legacy. Next slide. So the city has a very rich historic legacy that's really shaped the community in two ways, physically as well as culturally. So in planning for the city's future, we have to respect that, we have to celebrate, and in some instances, we have to redress this legacy. Next slide. So we have a series of approaches on how we can accomplish that goal. So the first is identifying key historic places in each neighborhood. So right now there are 5 National Register historic sites in the city. To me, that's a very small number. And when we started assessing the city, it became very clear that that's a woefully small number. The city has historic facilities, historic sites. It also has cultural sites, perhaps even more important than some of the historic sites. So we have a system of identifying those that are worthy of preservation. Maybe it's not on the National Register, but they're locally significant in many ways. What we can also do, in addition to preserving individual sites, is creating historic districts. And there are really perhaps 5 or 6 areas of the city that warrant historic district preservation, not because it's a neighborhood of old homes, but because the nature of the neighborhood was created in a certain way. It was developed in a manner back in the 1920s that warrants some special recognition. Those designations allow for a number of things, not only protection, but funding sources on how those neighborhoods can be improved in the future. So we have historic districts that we're thinking about, as well as areas where design guidelines can be adopted to help preserve and protect the character of those neighborhoods. Preserving historic buildings, preserving those older structures sometimes is difficult with our existing zoning codes and the building codes. So we have to make that, remove those impediments to preserving those buildings with the existing rules and regulations as they exist today. We have to address the city's legacy that exists. And the most significant issue that came up time and time again is the railroad cut that really sort of separated the city in half, created a north side and a south side. It was a physical barrier. It was a cultural barrier. It was a perceptual barrier. So the city's been doing a lot of work in improving the bridges over the cut, but there are opportunities to literally close over the cut, to cover it up and reclaim that territory for beneficial uses in the future. That's going to go a long way to healing that scar. When we looked at little things like the cultural and historic language that exists in the community, that language and that perception needs to be updated every once in a while. The language of signage, the language of the message we're talking about needs to be constantly updated. And of course, we have to engage marginalized communities. And you heard FOMA, you heard Michael talk about all the work that's gone on in reaching those communities to the best we can. And we have a lot of input from those folks on how we can deal with that. The challenge is connecting that preservation with economic growth. There are a host of recommendations in the plan on just how to do that. One of the other challenges is another emphasis of the plan, which is green building and sustainability. And again, those technologies have not always been sympathetic to historic preservation. So once again, there's a lot of recommendations on how we can meld those two goals. Next slide. Neighborhood diversity and inclusion. So a significant element of the plan, everyone has a right to feel safe and valued and included in the city, no matter age, race, ability, income, background. This document is grounded on the belief that the city should work for everybody. The plan offers a real clear path toward investment and growth and reflects the voices of the whole community. Next slide. So this is really what's typically been called environmental justice, and many of you have heard of that phrase. And really, it addresses things like traffic impacts and pollution and infrastructure, health disparities, and making sure that doesn't overburden certain neighborhoods as opposed to other neighborhoods. So it's about equity. Foma mentioned it earlier as well. One of the fundamental elements in dealing with things like equity, it starts with an inclusive workforce. It starts with preventing discrimination in housing, but it also deals with a lot of simple things that may be complicated to most people, but are easy to fix. For example, our zoning rules. We have to make sure our zoning doesn't unintentionally exclude people. So our zoning isn't intentionally exclusionary, but if you look at some of the elements in it, I'll give you an example. Parking requirements. The city's parking regulations haven't been updated in a very long time, and they reflect standards that don't reflect current parking patterns. We require too much parking. As a result of that, developers have to buy more land to provide parking that probably doesn't get used. As a result of that, the cost of those projects escalates, and that cost gets passed along. That's an inequity that's embedded in zoning that most people don't recognize. That's just one example. We have to make sure development benefits everybody and doesn't harm certain neighborhoods. So again, the example I like to use is if something is being built on a corner and the driveway access to that property, if you have a choice, you can be on that side of the building or the other side of the building. Ordinarily, we look at geometry and roadway characteristics, but we also have to look at where the traffic's going. If that traffic is going to a burdened community, that's a factor that should be brought into the consideration of something as simple as a driveway. Environmental justice. We have to make sure all of our neighborhoods have fair access to healthcare and emergency services and government support. Recommendations in the plan speak to that very specifically. And climate change, we're all kind of looking out our windows right now, waiting for the storm that's about to hit us. Those increased storm events, those more powerful storm events, tend to impact vulnerable neighborhoods far more significantly. So we have, again, a number of suggestions in the plan on how we can address that. Next slide. Healthy, safe, and active communities. Next slide. So when we put people, their health and safety first, we build stronger, more resilient communities. So there's a lot of ways to do. You can go to the next slide. You're pushing me along by pushing the slides. That's fine. So you'll hear this. This is a section that overlaps some of the other consultants that'll be presenting after I do. But we're trying to deal with things that make the community a healthy community. So complete neighborhoods, things like land use where we have multiple uses within neighborhoods. So you don't have to get in your car and drive. You can walk to the corner to get a gallon of milk, or you can walk to a store or a service industry that's nearby. So our neighborhoods are complete. We prioritize active transportation modalities. And what that means is all of the ways people get around, they should be allowed to get around safely and efficiently. So that's sidewalks and it's bike lanes and crosswalks and all the things that we do to improve those. And Peter will talk about many of those in a moment. Calming our streets, another notion that you may have heard about before, to make sure people aren't speeding in those areas where we're also accommodating pedestrians and so forth, and designing streets for everybody. Reducing health risks is something that we need to embed in our rules and regulations. That's pollution and traffic impacts. It's heat island issues in the summertime. We had a heat wave the past few days. You've been feeling it. We have neighborhoods in the city where there aren't a lot of trees. That's a simple thing to fix, and it addresses some of those heat island issues. The ability to provide access to healthy food. So we don't necessarily have food deserts in the city, but we don't have a lot of choice and a lot of options. So increasing those opportunities is something we want to try to achieve. And healthy housing. So our buildings are something that creates health impacts for us. That's building code issues and limiting toxins in buildings, and the building code issues associated with that, universal design, so that buildings are accessible to everybody. Embedded in the code, lots of recommendations with respect to that. Next slide. And I think that's it for me. So now this is Adam's piece, I believe.
So it is Adam's screen. I just got a text from Adam saying he got the blue screen of death on his computer. So instead of Pat or I pretending that we're Adam, because I don't think we would be very good at that. And we don't want to deprive you of Adam's presentation. Lynn, would it be possible to skip forward to my slides on safe and equitable mobility? We'll start there, and then we'll come back to Adam. It's a little out of order, but I think let's keep them going. So thank you all. Just to kind of reiterate, my name is Peter Farreau. I'm an urban planner with the firm AKRF, based out of White Plains, and we're thrilled to be on the team to help Mount Vernon get to its first comprehensive plan in quite a long time. So I'm going to go over a couple topics that really, as I look at them, are topics that need to be considered when implementing everything else the plan is talking about. So when we're talking about different land use developments, when we're talking about economic development and industrial development, what are some of these other items that we need to be including throughout those discussions? And one of them is clearly mobility. So if you go to the next slide, as has been clear throughout the presentation, we heard first and foremost from a number of people that making streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists is critical. Offering additional ways for folks to get around is critical. Using parking resources efficiently, which we'll get to, actually was also brought up as something that was very important. And as Pat mentioned, viewing all of those items through the lens of equity equity, sustainability, and livability is really important because these mobility goals are really what help drive Mount Vernon to be Mount Vernon. So if you go to the next slide, the plan includes a number of different recommendations for improving safe and equitable mobility throughout the city. So we go through and talk about street safety and pedestrian safety throughout the city. We also did a deep dive on 3 corridors where we walked these corridors with city staff from DPW, from the police department, from planning, and others, and made very specific recommendations along those corridors for upgrades that would help improve pedestrian safety. As Pat talked about bicycle access, building out bike lanes and shared paths and the infrastructure that goes with it, bike racks and things like that, really is something that could help improve mobility throughout the city, and it has this added benefit of being relatively inexpensive and relatively good for public health. But also, what are some other options out there besides walking and biking? And so the plan goes through some other options that are out there, like bike and scooter share programs. What are the pros and cons of those? Where do they work well? Where don't they work well? What are the items that we need to think about? As well as shuttles for certain areas, especially in downtown or between the train stations, to kind of help fill that last mile gap. And actually, the city is in the middle of a study right now, looking at the potential for a transit shuttle that would be all electric, and kind of looking at the feasibility of that. And that's kind of one of the outgrowths of this comprehensive plan. We also go through the potential for smarter parking regulations. The reality is Mount Vernon requires more off-street parking for new development than most other cities in Westchester. In fact, I think all other cities. This is especially true in downtown. So while the plan does not say, nor do we think, that parking requirements for new development should be eliminated, it does say we need to kind of update them and come more in line with what is actually needed and what we actually see in the marketplace today in terms of demand and in terms of supply. Because every off-street parking space comes with a cost. It raises the cost of development, whether it's residential or commercial, and that cost is borne by the user. There simply is no free parking. In fact, there's a whole book about why there's no such thing as free parking. So we really want to kind of focus on the ways that off-street parking could be rationalized. Again, we're not talking about eliminating requirements. We're talking about making them make a little bit more sense. And we're also talking about upgrading and modernizing, excuse me, the way that we use curbs in the city, right? Most cities have their curb requirements and parking guidelines built 50, 60, 70 years ago. And the reality is we use our street parking a lot differently. In fact, a lot of times it's not street parking, it's delivery parking. And we need to be able to thoughtfully integrate the need for safe access for delivery vehicles and kind of rationalize that curb space in certain areas of the city. And finally, no one community can do all of this on their own. The only way to be successful is to partner with the MTA that runs the rail lines that go through the city, is to partner with the county who runs the bus operations and other businesses whose employees rely on these services, as well as the schools whose students rely on these services, to kind of integrate and come up with community-driven solutions. So if you go to the next slide, one of the other elements that we like that kind of really needs to be thought about throughout the implementation of the rest of the plan is green spaces and connections to the natural environment. So what did we hear from the city, from residents? If you go to the next slide, Lynn. Oh, I got something. green spaces are important to city residents, to city employees. They help define the character of the city. We know that green spaces and connections to the natural environment improve the livability of the city. They're important to recreation, relaxation, physical and mental well-being, and social well-being. They also, in a city like Mount Vernon, where you have a more dense pattern of development that was intentional. This was 150 years of planning has said we wanted more dense development to support more housing, to support more businesses. Those green spaces and connections to the natural environment are what help support equity and sustainability. And it really does help nurture stronger bonds within a neighborhood. So if you go to the next slide, we talk about ways that Mount Vernon can leverage its existing assets as well as improve the green spaces that it doesn't yet have, but will have in the future. Obviously, the Hutchinson River is clearly a gem that's waiting to be tapped as it continues to be revitalized and the areas around there continue to be better utilized. There is a potential for really improving and making that linear greenway. That also could be a shared use path and a transit corridor. And all of this can be paired with ecological restoration, and the plan goes through how that might be accomplished. And then you've got the existing parks and green spaces throughout the city, the major ones, I'll call them, the Bronx River Reservation, Huntswoods, Hartley. And a lot of the recommendations that came out of this plan was improving how you get to those places and those green spaces, making it easier to access, making the signage a little better, making it a little more clear, as well as improving the lighting and the sidewalks and the crosswalks and the pedestrian ramps. If we can make those improvements to make those existing spaces more accessible, we're dramatically improving the ability of residents to use those spaces. And the same thing holds true as new city parks and the city go through and upgrade kind of the smaller spaces and parks and playgrounds throughout the city. Those are poised and really the best candidates for prioritizing those access improvements, those lighting improvements, those signage improvements as those parks get finished and those playgrounds get done, improving the area around there and the paths to get there really kind of maximize that investment. So if you go to the next slide, the other piece to this is that greenery in and of itself, in those street trees, in those community gardens, is critical. And so integrating this greenery into the public realm is really important. Continuing your urban forestry initiatives, you're in the middle of a citywide tree inventory, continuing that, and really identifying and prioritizing streets where you can really add those street trees and really grow that urban tree canopy. There's clearly a large discrepancy in the number of street trees in certain neighborhoods. And as the city looks to prioritize improvements and investments, the investments in street trees, when you go and do sidewalks and other things, really have dramatic effects on a neighborhood, not just in terms of aesthetics, but in terms of neighborhood cohesiveness, in terms of reducing the temperature, literally, of the neighborhood. We also talk about strengthening the city's tree ordinance and tree advisory board, both of which exist, but helping to clarify the roles and responsibilities, providing some more tools and some more landscape standards. So the plan goes into all of that. So if you go to the next slide, so we talked a little bit about kind of green spaces and connection to the natural environment. We talked about that being in the public realm, but now we're talking a little bit more about the streetscape itself. And as we said before, I mean, the reality is Mount Vernon had an intentional development program, intentional development plan of building a city that had more dense housing, more dense commercial uses, more dense industrial, while your neighbors did not. And that means that those public spaces that you have are that much more important. So if you go to the next slide, your sidewalks, your parks, all of these things, your public plazas become that much more critical because they're central to the civic identity of Mount Vernon in ways that some other communities they might not be, because they're not relied on to the same extent. So if you go to the next slide, again, we talked about how can we take these great assets that the city has and improve them and make them even better. Again, we focused on a couple specific corridors. We're talking about this cultural placemaking, which really is a way that we can use signage and art and design standards for certain neighborhoods to help expand and kind of reinforce that neighborhood character. Obviously, we talked about Gramerton and South Fourth, unifying the identity. A lot of that is in the Downtown Vision Report. I'm not going to go over it again today, but really kind of emphasizing that piece as well. And then, of course, the maintenance, the infrastructure, the kind of non-sexy things that need to be done. The city's doing a lot of them right now in terms of its sewers and water and streets and repaving. That you can see a little better than the sewers. And then the same thing for the sidewalks and the pedestrian infrastructure. And really have this opportunity then to kind of make places, unique places within the city that honors the city's cultural heritage. So if you go to the next slide, throughout all of these other items, and this is kind of, it almost goes without saying that we want to incorporate resiliency and sustainability, but we're going to say it anyway because it is important. You know, resiliency, we talk about the ways that communities can recover and come back from different disasters, whether they're flooding, whether they're heat waves, whether they're snowstorms, whether they're hurricanes. You know, how resilient is the city's physical infrastructure, social infrastructure? And then we talk about sustainability, and we talk about, are we leaving this world in a place where it can be continued for 7 generations from now? So if you go to the next slide, we heard a lot about this from the city, from city residents. It was very clear that most city residents understood very, very well that climate change, increased flooding is a concern. And the need to have equitable solutions for these problems was similarly very clear. And when we solve for those sustainability solutions, we're also solving for quality of life. We're solving for public health, for safer streets. They go hand in hand. So if you go to the next slide, Mount Vernon is clearly on its way, right? You have a director of sustainability. He's doing a number of things. This plan does not say, you know what, you should be doing this instead. This plan says, these are the great things that are already happening. Here are some more things to help focus on in the next steps. And so we talk about preserving the natural landscapes. We talk about trees, the Hutchinson River waterfront. Here we're talking about kind of ecological restoration, right? Linking it with public education, with mobility. We talk about the heat island effect and ways that can be mitigated. It's not just street trees, although that is a huge component. There are ways that you can design your public spaces and your private developments to help reduce that heat island. We also talk about kind of flood resilience. And here I'm not talking about kind of riverine flooding. I'm not talking about the Bronx River or the Hutch. I'm talking about kind of, they call it urban flooding, and I don't really love the term, but this is flooding that's caused by poor drainage in highly developed areas, right? Where the natural drainage systems just simply aren't there. And as Adam would have pointed out by now, if he hadn't gotten off the computer, our stormwater systems were built for a climate that doesn't exist in this location anymore. We're not used to getting this much rain. we're not used to getting it this quickly. So what are the ways that we can deal with that? Obviously, we can build bigger pipes, but it turns out that's really expensive. So can we pair building bigger pipes in some locations with some other strategies? And we think there are ways to do that in Mount Vernon. We identify some of those through green infrastructure, through lots of other kind of improvements that are really targeted on specific areas that experience this type of flooding on a recurrent basis. And in fact, New York City has a great program now. They're calling it their Cloudburst program. It's a little ambitious. DEP certainly has quite a budget. But there are elements from that program that I think would be very interesting to apply to Mount Vernon, and we go into that in the plan. And finally, kind of goes without saying, but continuing to improve the sustainability of the city's operations, right? As you are already doing, continuing to electrify the fleet, using your capital dollars for projects that improve the city's sustainability, reduce its operating costs through energy efficiency programs, leverage other funding sources like the New York Power Authority, whose mandate is to serve local governments. Well, it turns out they finance energy efficiency projects for local governments all the time, and your city does that. And there are ways to kind of continue to leverage that. So we go into all of that, including kind of helping to get to that next stage of climate smart community certification, which is a New York State program that recognizes municipalities that are really working to curb their greenhouse gas emissions, not just their own from city operations, but kind of throughout the city. And so we really think of these kind of 4-5 components as being pieces of the overall strategy and plan, and kind of things that you do while you're doing everything else. And that's one of the fun parts about the plan and that I enjoy. So now that Adam is back, I think we're going to ask Lynn to kind of skip all the way back. And I'll turn it over to Adam Bosch from Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress.
Yeah, it wasn't on my bingo card to catch shrapnel from Peter because I got the blue screen of death on my computer. That wasn't on my bingo card for tonight. I apologize. I did get the blue screen of death on my computer. Those who know what I'm talking about know it comes without warning, so I apologize for that. Happy to be back on. Is that my first one, Lynn? Just checking to make sure if you go back. Yeah, that's my first one. Okay, so hopefully no one said this yet. For those of you who've been following our work throughout the first 2 phases, you know I always say this at the beginning. I want to make clear to everybody before I start talking that a comprehensive plan is not a magic wand that you wave around and overnight new buildings start popping up and bike lanes start popping up and gathering spaces and bounce houses start popping up. That's simply not what we're engaged in doing. If this plan gets passed, in a couple months, these things don't magically appear. This thing is a roadmap. It is a wish list. It is a to-do list for you as citizens of the city and your elected officials to then go tackle these things in different sequences and based on different priorities. So I always like to share that we're not building anything through this process, right? We're just simply suggesting a path of actions for your government and for your neighbors. So I want to make sure that's clear. I always like to say that at the beginning. So I got a couple chapters here to share with you. Stick with me. First one is on housing. Next slide, please. So throughout the process, we heard a lot about housing. We certainly know that Mount Vernon's future depends on strong housing policies to help the city grow and preserve the housing it has and grow, support longtime residents. When we did our public outreach, all the outreach you heard Michael talk about, Ifoma talk about, more than 90% of residents told us the same thing when we asked them, what's the monthly payment for housing that you're looking for? They told us $2,500 to $3,000 a month. One person even told us $3,000 is a lot for Mount Vernon, but if the place is nice, we'll figure out a way to scrounge it together. I'll remember him saying that for the rest of my life. Housing helps you stay competitive and affordable, improve the quality of life for everybody. And it's important just to reiterate that housing is at the very foundation of economic development, community vibrancy, prosperity, people across the full spectrum of incomes who provide the full spectrum of jobs and goods and services to you and your neighbors need a place to live so they can actively be your neighbor and supply those goods and services in the local economy. Next. So let's talk about some of the recommendations here that came from input, came from data. One of the things that we feature prominently is just trying to expand home ownership opportunities throughout the city through things like smaller homes where they can be built, through multifamily home ownership like co-ops, townhomes, things like that. We specifically call out some of the stuff that Habitat for Humanity in Westchester and New York City is doing to reestablish the first rung of home ownership throughout the region. Right now, statistically, home ownership is very, very, very far out of reach for someone who does not already own a home. In fact, we're releasing new data tomorrow from Pattern that shows in Westchester County the difference between what someone can get with a maximum mortgage and the typical price of a home. There's more than a $280,000 difference between those two things. So homeownership is very, very far out of reach. Want to make sure we bring that back within reach and expand what homeownership looks like. Building more housing near transit in downtown to support walkability and local businesses. This is really important. You all have a great opportunity to build some more housing near your train stations, in your downtown, where housing, with large swaths of the downtown now is currently not allowed. We've addressed that in phase 1. For those of you who've been paying attention, MTA just announced a big award to build housing at the parking lot of the Beacon train station yesterday up in Dutchess County. They're doing a feasibility study in Poughkeepsie, and I feel strongly that if Mount Vernon plays its cards the right way, Mount Vernon could be the next place, Mount Vernon East, could be the next place where MTA looks to do something similar to take advantage of that area around the train station for people to live, commute to the city, commute back, spend money in Mount Vernon, have more business space. It's a big, big thing. Adding senior housing to meet the growing demand. We heard a lot about this. You have a limited portfolio of senior housing. It tends to be sort of low income senior housing. There is a demand for slightly different types of senior housing, a little more quantity of senior housing, and finding the right places to do this and making sure it gets mixed into neighborhoods so that we're not setting seniors aside from the rest of the population, but we're integrating across ages and generations is important. Preventing displacement, keep housing affordable through inclusionary zoning. We designed a couple different methods in the draft report for how to have an inclusionary zoning policy. Many, if not most communities nowadays have one that, as you're seeing new development interests come into the city, ensuring that a certain proportion of those new housing units are affordable for people at different income levels is really, really important. Again, you have to think about the full spectrum and the full breadth of the incomes and jobs that your neighbors do in the city and make sure there's ample supply of quality housing for everybody. Encourage affordability with incentives for developers. So in some cases, you can do things like density bonuses or other bonuses that make it feasible for developers to add additional units and additional affordable units. If you're going to take advantage of certain spaces throughout the city, you have sewer, you have water, you have train access, it does make sense for you to try to maximize the benefit to your community by maximizing the use of some of these spaces where it makes sense at the right scale. Simplify the permitting process for new housing. Peter said this before about something else. If you're going to have a process that is long and cumbersome, that adds more cost to the developers, for their architects, for their engineers, for their lawyers, for their consultants, and takes 2, 3, 4, 10 years, that's going to result in more expensive housing costs. So you really need to make sure that there's a rational, relatively quick process to get those projects permitted. Support safe duplex and triplex conversions with a focus on health and anti-displacement. We heard about this a lot. I've seen some commentary in the chat. I want to be clear about what we're talking about here. There are some parts of the city where single-family homes have been converted to 2 or 3 family homes outside what the rules are now. You have 2 choices, but I want to be clear about what this means. This is two different signals that the market is sending you. The first signal the market is sending you is that there's not enough housing in your city. That's why people are just building more of it within the existing structures. The second signal they're sending you is that the housing that does exist in part of the city is too expensive for someone to afford on their own without having a tenant involved, okay? So what we're suggesting here is look at those on a case-by-case basis. Where those conversions have happened in a way that complies with building codes and health and safety, you really should consider formalizing them so that you prevent the displacement of your neighbors. Where those conversions have happened in a way that does not comply with building code, those people should be penalized and something should be done about that. We write about that quite a bit in the report. Happy to have you all read it when it comes out. Next slide, please. Effective government service. Next slide. So good government, as you know, turns ideas into action. And we write in this chapter that when city staff, systems, and resources work together, policies just don't stay on paper. They don't just stay as ideas, but they actually turn into action that make a real difference in people's lives in a place like Mount Vernon. So our task in this chapter was, hey, how can Mount Vernon operate as a government more effectively and more efficiently to provide public service to the residents of Mount Vernon? And public servants are meant to provide public service. And that's what this is all about. Next slide, please. So a couple things here. Throughout the course of the past 2 years, as we sort of dug in and talked to a lot of folks who are working in the city government, it became clear to us that a lot of folks have an overlapping sense of what they're meant to be doing, department to department, worker to worker. And we think it's really important to define a clear mission for each city department. Each city department needs to have a mission statement. That mission statement should clearly delineate what that department's meant to be doing. It should be signed by every employee in that department like it's a charter, and their signatures of that mission statement should be hung on the wall in the department somewhere to show that everyone is part of that mission and they've signed their name to be part of that mission on behalf of their neighbors. That's important not only for team building, but a sense of what the heck you're meant to be doing when you clock into your civil service job at the beginning and the end of every day. In alignment with that, every employee should have a set of tasks and standards. I have this for my employees at Pattern. I had this when I was worked in government service. That outlines exactly what you should be doing as an employee. What are your tasks? And what are the standards up to which you are expected to perform those tasks? And those tasks and standards then provide a basis for an annual performance review. And if you're performing all your tasks to a high standard, that gives a reason for a promotion or a raise. If you're not performing your tasks and you're doing a low standard, well, that kind of conduct over a series of years leads to something that's not a promotion, okay? But that's the basis for accountability in any job, especially a job that where the salaries are being paid by taxpayer dollars to, again, serve the public. Important to launch a quarterly training for all staff. There's a lot of things that go on in government now that require staff to be trained. So anything from customer service to budgeting to basic tenets of things like cybersecurity so that we make sure our systems are secure and tight. That would really help, I think, the staff members in the city government. Forming an economic development cabinet is really important, I think, at this time in the history of Mount Vernon. You have a lot of other local governments surrounding Mount Vernon who are operating on a very high level of strategy when it comes to economic development. This goes anything from who's the first person, if someone has a project and they want to come to Mount Vernon, who's the first person they talk to? Once they talk to that person, is there a way they can talk about collaborating on grants? Is it as of right by zoning what they want to do? And then there's an opportunity to get together every month, the mayor and the members of the Economic Development Cabinet, to talk about projects that are working their way through the process, get a status update, prospects that might be out there that you're chasing, what's the status of those, and then proactive stuff. How are we setting the conditions for economic development in the city, either through applying for grants, improving infrastructure, thinking about different sector-based hub strategies? There's the need to talk about this stuff on a regular basis to make sure things are moving through the pipeline at a steady rate and with a high degree of oversight and professionalism. Standardizing city operations with clear SOPs, that's standard operating procedures for things like permits. How do we handle and respond to complaints? How do we deal with maintenance tasks? What do we do with fleet maintenance of our city fleet vehicles? How do we handle requests to use city parks for events? There should be standard operating procedures that are written and understood across the various departments in the city government, so that if someone's sick and not there to handle it that day, they can pull the SOP out of a document and understand what they're meant to do to make sure that there's a continuum of that service to the public. My understanding is you may have a citywide data team, but really deepening the work of that citywide data team to unify systems, to make sure that you don't have data across a bunch of split systems that can't talk to each other, and that you're maximizing your use of data for the public good and efficient operation of government. And last one in this section, publish an annual mayor's management report. It's important. There are lots of cities now that do this. Anything from miles of road paved to speed, number of 911 calls responded to, total grants earned by the city. And you can track then as the public the progress and the activities of your government over a given year. This is an annual type report. They do a gigantic one in New York City. They do smaller ones in cities up and down the Hudson River Valley. It is a good point of public accountability. Next. A couple more slides here real quick. Role in the region. So go to the next slide. This one, is important. It's important that when you're going through the process of making a comprehensive plan, that you step back and kind of look from a 30,000-foot view of what is our place in the region? What makes us special? What are the aspirational big ticket items we might aim for to show off what Mount Vernon is, give us an identity, and any community should do this. You also don't want to try to be in a role necessarily that others are performing in the region, although there's some places that do similar things. Next, I want to talk about the ones that we thought about for Mount Vernon and why. Someone mentioned City of Homes, right? City of Homes as a nickname comes from the city's founding when it was carved into more than 1,000 parcels so that families from Connecticut and New York City could build homes in Mount Vernon, live in Mount Vernon, commute back to where they work. And that's, I'm simplifying it, but that's how Mount Vernon became the City of Homes. Well, we're suggesting City of Homes version 2.0. Why version 2.0? Because home doesn't look the same as it used to, period. Home is not just a single family home or an apartment. There is an entire spectrum of typologies that make up home for different people. That runs all the way from single family homes, all the way through co-ops, townhomes, condos, single room occupancy type homes, senior homes. There's all kinds of homes. But the reality is that with the access to mass transit you have, with, as Peter pointed out, the infrastructure that you have in the city, you're in a position in Mount Vernon to support diverse housing types to meet the needs of a very diverse population, okay? And across all types and price points. That helps you grow the economy. It helps you have a diverse workforce. It helps you strengthen the community, and housing really boosts your vibrancy quotient as a community when it's done right for different people with different incomes. The other thing we want to point out is that, when you think about Mount Vernon, and I know you all know this as Mount Vernon residents, Mount Vernon has really shaped the nation's cultural and artistic legacy, right? From, Dick Clark and E.B. White all the way up to Denzel Washington and DMX and J.B. Smoove. I mean, you have produced in Mount Vernon folks who have been touchstones and emblems of American culture and arts. And we think I mentioned this at the in-person session, Yonkers is now billing itself as Hollywood on the Hudson, right? They have the Lionsgate studio. They're producing lots and lots of shows of movies over there. Fine. If they want to do the production, then Mount Vernon should produce the talent, right? I think that's a good identity for Mount Vernon to have. You already have assets like the Denzel Washington School and other things that sort of bend you in that direction of continuing that legacy of cultural and artistic excellence. Next. A regional destination to play and compete. the youth sports economy in the United States is a $40 billion industry. Okay. You've just had Memorial Stadium redone. You have some other assets on the Mount Vernon side of the river, the Sports Dome, Sports Hutch, the dome there. When you look over the other side in Pelham, they also have a lot of athletic facilities right along the corridor there. There's no reason that Mount Vernon and Pelham shouldn't collaborate and be able to host 4 to 10 big sporting events a year that bring people into the city to not only spend time there with their families, to shop there, have a meal there, create sales tax revenue there. Someday that may allow you to, be able to have a hotel there to host those folks. And you have an opportunity, I think, to really stand out in this part of the region as a place that could be a regional destination to play and compete if you combine your assets with the assets of your neighbor. And that would be a great idea for Mount Vernon. The last one, you're one of only 3 cities in the entire region that has maintained a really good manufacturing base. And you should really thump your chest about that. It's a great source of jobs for Mount Vernon, and it gives you a unique edge. You are within a day's commute of like a third of the population of the United States. And so there really is an opportunity here to grow that manufacturing base. Think about how can you get into high tech, green tech, clean tech, semiconductor supply chain, some of the things that the state is focusing on trying to attract to the region. Figuring out all different ways you can make plays for things in that sector. It's something that you should be proud of and focus on going forward. We have some key strategies built into the plan for that. Last set of slides here, our last 2 sets of slides, I'll speak quickly. Reliable and modern infrastructure. I'm going to go through this very rapidly. Next slide, please. This is, just understanding cities like Mount Vernon only survive and thrive if infrastructure is kept in a state of good repair. It's important for the protection of public health, environmental health, connectivity. This section talks about water, sewer, broadband. Okay, water, sewer, broadband. Next. Just basic stuff. We know you're doing the big sewer repair job. The first one is just make sure it gets done, right? I mean, that's really, really important for the future of the city. The funding's in place, the work's being done. Just see that through to the finish line. Investing in long-term water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure, Peter pointed this out a minute ago, is really, really important. Having a good capital plan for these things so that you're taking on debt as you retire debt, and keeping things on a good cycle and a good state of repair is important. One of the things we noticed is that actually the city's water distribution system is slowly leaking more water as the years go by. This is pretty common for cities in the Northeast where we have older infrastructure than other sort of younger parts of the country, let's say. But we do think you need to invest in some better leak detection habits to track these leaks and sort of seal them off, because you are purchasing your water from New York City, and it's important to do that. Improving water efficiency through grants, upgrades. DEP had offered you guys some money at one point to do some demand management work. It's important to follow up on those things. Really mapping water service capacity, tracking sewer progress. This is important as you get development activity in the city. It's important for those developers to have some predictability on what parts of the sewer system have been upgraded already, where the water service exists, and the quantity that's needed to support that development. And then expanding digital access by partnering to get devices into homes, into the hands of your neighbors, because nowadays you can't apply for a job, you can't go to school, and you can't get healthcare unless you have a computer. And when we looked at the data for Mount Vernon, you have internet access that covers the entire city. The bigger challenge we found was access to a device. There are lots of folks who don't have proper access to a device to connect to the internet. Next. Last section here is on economic development. Super, super important section. It's important just to understand, what is economic development? Well, it's more than just job attraction, retention, and growth, right? A lot of people think of it as job attraction, retention, and growth. But it's also workforce training. Housing is at the very foundation of economic development, because if you don't have people, you don't have jobs, you don't have economic activity. Investments in infrastructure, transportation, and housing. Promoting investment and competitiveness. And when you bundle these things together, what we're really talking about is when you have economic development at the right scale and scope for your city, you have vibrancy, you have prosperity, you have well-being. Okay, next slide, please. The thing on the left is probably the most important thing that I wrote in any section I did in the comprehensive plan. There is something right now that makes Mount Vernon unique among all the cities in the Hudson Valley. We are seeing more cities use publicly owned properties and put those out into the development world with very specific asks. It's called an RFEI process. RFEI stands for Request for Expressions of Interest. And the way this works is you have a parcel, you know what you would like to see done on that parcel because you did a lot of public outreach through the comprehensive plan, and you know what would be done for the public good in that spot. You put it out into the development world and say, dear developers, send us your proposals to do this thing that we would like you to do here. You get lots of proposals, bring them to the public, and you pick one that the developer will then come build and start your momentum. Most communities have one or two of these sites. Mount Vernon has 12 to 15. You have a really, relatively large number of sites where this is possible. And I want to be clear, the reason this is important is most communities are put in the position where they are waiting for some investor, some developer, some person to come and help start their economic development for them. You are in the opposite position. You are in the position where you have in your hand 12 to 15 dominoes that you can play to start your own downtown revitalization, to start your own momentum, to do your own improvements that create public benefits that you want on behalf of your people. And when this is done right, this is an extremely powerful tool. So we spent 3 or 4 pages in the draft comp plan going in painstaking detail over how to do this the right way and why it is a powerful, appropriate tool for Mount Vernon. So that's something I'll call your attention to. Those properties can be used for a wide range of purposes, from housing to public space to things that will create jobs and support local businesses. If FOMA mentioned bounce houses and bowling alleys, not all of them are appropriate for that, but some of them are appropriate for the kind of, let's call it, entertainment and gathering-based things that we heard from the youth and from families throughout the public outreach sessions. A couple last things: boost economic growth. I mentioned the underused parking near Mount Vernon East. I'm telling you, if you play your cards right, MTA is going to pay attention to you. I think that's a really big opportunity for Mount Vernon. Creating unified brand and business asset map. Really, your ability to talk to the economic development world about who Mount Vernon is, have a brand, have a vibe, tell people who you are, who you're going to be, have a marketing plan is important. We talked about growing local manufacturing. There's some strategies for that we outline in the plan. Improving land use, adopting a vacancy ordinance. We mentioned this in phase 1. Right now, the biggest use of downtown storefronts is vacancy. It's about 31% vacancy. Having an ordinance to deal with that vacancy is important. We designed a couple ideas for you in the plan. Updating zoning to allow family-friendly spaces, entertainment, social hubs. If FOMA talked about that, we heard that was probably one of the top 3 things we heard throughout the public outreach, is that people were tired of having to leave Mount Vernon to hang out with their friends and family. And that shows great fidelity to Mount Vernon. What they're saying is, we would like to stay in our own city to hang out. And I think that's a great thing. Work with Westchester County. There's a contiguous parcel or 2 by the Hutchinson River. Peter mentioned the Hutchinson River, that are owned by both the city and the county. And there's an opportunity there to do something. We don't prescribe exactly what, other than to say that the city and the county should really get together and start putting together some ideas and working with the public on some ideas about how those properties could be used for a better, more beneficial use on behalf of the public. Mentioned collaborating with the MTA. I think that's it for me. Next slide. Yeah, I'm going to shut up now. I'm done. Thanks. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, we're coming back to me. Oh, there we go. So what you've seen today is really a preview of the comprehensive plan. This plan is going to be released in a little over a month, shortly after Labor Day. The reason that we wanted to have this presentation now as a preview is to start the process of getting your feedback on all of the ideas in this plan. There is still room for us to make changes and edits. There is still room for more ideas in this plan, but we wanted to start that process now. So once that plan is released in September, you are going to have an opportunity to go through all 300 plus pages of the plan, word for word, and provide feedback on it. For today, we're going to be doing it in the feedback in the chat, but in September, starting today, you are going to be able to put feedback in through the Envision Mount Vernon website. Sorry. So we are also still going to be having a plan adoption process going through City Council, and there's going to be an opportunity for public hearings and for you to publicly talk about your thoughts on the plan at a City Council public hearing. So I'm going to hand it back off to James now and invite you to start reading off some of those questions from today.
Absolutely. Thank you to our entire consultant team for that. It's a very, in-depth, robust presentation that has led to dozens and dozens of comments and questions, which we'll do our best to get through now, some of which the planning community development team will answer and some that our consultants will answer. So just starting at beginning, from David Reich, not a good idea to eliminate single-family housing zoning in some areas that are now single-family. ADUs are also problematic, causing overcrowding. The city does not plan to eliminate single-family housing in the city. We know that some towns and some cities, some as large as Minneapolis, have banned single-family construction moving forward. That is not what we intend to do. We intend to right-size neighborhoods and look for opportunities where it makes sense to add density. I noticed there was a lot of conversation about density, the definition of density, et cetera, throughout the chat. But there will be, we Pat talked a lot about like historic preservation, identifying areas. It's not only for like historic district purposes, but we're identifying areas to maintain neighborhood context. That's a key element of this plan. And during our community conversations, we discussed that it's not only about growth, but it's also about maintaining neighborhood continuity and context. As far as ADUs, that's something we're looking into and trying to get a better sense of. Recent talk in planning circles last few years, ADUs seem kind of pitched as a silver bullet to solve a lot of problems. That's not really the case. It has to be done right, and it's kind of out there at the forefront. And so, it needs to be looked at very nuanced fashion to address that correctly.
Yeah, and James, I'll just add there on the ADU piece, ADUs are fine. I mean, there's some folks just built 2 of them in my neighborhood. They're not perfect for everywhere. And I'll tell you, people get all ginned up about ADUs, but if you made a pie chart with the most impactful housing solutions for the housing shortage, both affordability and availability that we have now in the region and you have locally in Mount Vernon, the slice of that pie that ADUs would account for is a sliver so small you'd barely see it. Just because it costs a lot to build them. We don't have a lot of outbuildings that lend themselves naturally to them, and people get all ginned up about something that's, just not the biggest slice of solutions that we're likely to see in the region in terms of ones that make a big impact.
Thanks, Em. All right, continuing with the questions. Roughly how many people participated in previous public outreach efforts? As I said, we've done over 30 of community conversations, public workshops, and such. You need to calculate the exact number, but depending on session and the topic, it ranged from literally a handful to about 100. And so you're talking about 40 to 50 each session. And so, we definitely reached over 1,000 people in terms of our outreach. I know that sounds like a drop in the bucket compared to the 80,000 or so people who live here, but for those who do public outreach, usually when you get somewhere between 30 and 50, you consider it, a successful interaction, even though, of course, we would like 300 to 500 people at each event. Going down, comment that Mount Vernon needs a fancy reception venue for weddings and other celebrations. We shouldn't have to go to New Rochelle and Mamaroneck. That is definitely something we heard throughout the community conversations. Is a place to gather and celebrate. And we even heard it amongst the elected officials. It'd be nice to host events in the city as opposed to looking next door in all directions. Next question is the need for streamlining efficiency and transparency is needed for homeowners as well as commercial businesses. Sure, the complete revamp of the building department remains a key blocker to progress and has not been dealt with in years. That's been an ongoing conversation with the city, and even though we have made a lot of progress with the buildings department, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There are just certain hurdles that are just not easily overcome by just reorganizing or just making wholesale changes. There's being able, number one, to have the funding for certain positions to address the capacity issues that we need. We have to consider these are union jobs as well and work with the unions in improving the capacity and ability of staff. Next, the plan calls for permitting duplexes, triplexes, and single-family zones. To what extent is this plan calling for the elimination of single-family zoning? No. Will there be any 100% designated single-family zones? Yes. For homeowners, stakeholders, this is extremely problematic. Peter, do you want to address the first part of that regarding triplex?
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam kind of touched on it pretty well in his section, right? There are places where outside of the rules these things are happening, and so then the question is, right, what do you do with them? And how do you make sure that they're safe? How do you make sure that they are responding to the market's need, both in terms of new units as well as the owner of the house in some cases needing the extra income? But I think it's also clear, I think a good chunk of this plan really focused on the vibrancy of many of the neighborhoods, of all the neighborhoods in the city, and how Adam talked about the fidelity to the city that was felt throughout, and the affinity that people had for their own neighborhoods. Wasn't saying tear this all down. It was saying, I love it here. I wish this thing could be better. Great. And so I think the plan really tries to honor that, and in no way is it suggesting kind of a uniform density for the city or anything like that. It really is recognizing the uniqueness of the various neighborhoods, but also being very clear and blunt about the fact that there are challenges facing many of your neighbors, both in the city and throughout the region. And there are options on how to deal with that, and there are implications for those various options. And I think the plan goes into a pretty good detail on suggestions.
I just wanted to follow up what Peter was saying. The plan was specifically tailored around 15 different neighborhoods in the city. Some of the recommendations for some of those neighborhoods are don't do a thing. They're fine the way they are. The level of detail in the comprehensive plan assessed each neighborhood and looked at their strengths and weaknesses and where there are opportunities. And what you're hearing from us, we're talking about some of those neighborhoods where there are opportunities to do something. But there are other neighborhoods that we're not recommending much of anything to occur in them because they're just fine the way they are today. So that was important to bear in mind when you'll see the recommendations. It's really neighborhood oriented and specific to the different areas of the city.
Thanks, folks. I just want to say some of the comments and thoughts are duplicative. I don't say that negatively, but a lot of folks had the same ideas and comments. And so if I pass yours and just kind of gloss over it, please don't take it personal. It's just if we've addressed it, I just want to be respectful of people's time this evening, even though we are thrilled that we have so many comments and so much interest in what's been presented. So hello, Donna. There are so many historic sites in architecture. There is an active historic and landmark society. Please engage them. Yes, we will. Thank you for that. Next, what are the specific neighborhoods identified as of historic interest? This draft mentions 6, and what are the 5 neighborhoods that are of design interest, and what does that mean? Pat, do you want to handle them?
Sure. So there are actually 6 neighborhoods that have we've determined have some element of historic relevance that would warrant the designation of a historic district. Hunts Woods, Oakwood Heights, Primrose Park, the downtown, South Side, and Parkside. Those are the 6 neighborhoods that theoretically have the bones of a historic district. A lot of work would be necessary to flesh that out, but that's the recommendation. And then there are 5 neighborhoods where simple design guidelines would be appropriate. Fleetwood, Sunset Hill, downtown again, Vernon Heights, and Parkside. Those are the neighborhoods.
Thank you, Pat. Next question, how will this or any plan be funded? Taxes are already very high, so understanding what the strategies are to cover the need and agreed to improvements are critical. Such a small number of tax-paying businesses, which is part of what's really needed to cover the costs. So, not the exact number at the top of my head, but in both phases, the comprehensive plan costs somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 spread over 3 years. 75,000 of that was covered by a grant from the Empire State Development, New York State agency, and the rest was covered by taxpayer dollars spread over years. This will be, I just want for people's understanding, even though we do have a comprehensive plan, a next step from the comprehensive plan, because I always say the comprehensive plan is a beginning, not an end, because it's a 10-year vision, is that the city will be redoing its zoning ordinance. And so that's a separate initiative that will number is a more intense process and number in the hundreds of thousands. But part of the phasing was to spread the cost over years, so there wasn't a big immediate hit on taxpayers and our finances. Next question, it's a long one. When we talk about multifamily housing and changing zoning rules, the intent might not to be less exclusionary. Intent might be to be less exclusionary. How do we make sure developers whose main goal is profit and don't live in Mount Vernon don't build housing that is not for people, diversity, for their own profit? There's an example that relates to the historic character. So in short, to address that part, for the downtown vision report, we did identify and make a recommendation that there be a set aside for workforce housing. When we talk about workforce or affordable housing, our immediate idea goes to low income or very low income housing. That's not necessarily the case in New York State. The federal guidelines, usually low income housing is 80% of area median income and below. But affordable housing in New York State goes as high as 165% of area median income. What does that mean? So for a family of 4, the area median comes around 156,000, specifically for Westchester. So if you take that, multiply it by 1.65, so that's the ceiling of what is the definition of affordable. So it does include everyone from low income to middle income. And why is that important? Because a lot of times there's a phrase called the missing middle housing, which often squeezes out moderate and middle income families to allow for market rate development and low income development. So those more working class folks or just lower middle class folks often get left out of the process when it comes to development. And so we have identified, at least for downtown, a set aside, made a recommendation for a set aside. So, but for, just kind of, we do need to build more market rate development, and just we are encouraging developers that if they do that, they build, according to this comprehensive plan and standards that we set when we do the zoning ordinance. which neighborhood, this question, are being considered for rezoning. That in of itself is, going to be a process. Some, downtown, there were recommendations on how to rezone, but primarily what we're looking at are higher density corridors that we feel may be underbuilt, such as, or just not built out correctly, such as Sanford Boulevard, parts of Columbus Avenue, where they're underutilized. That's really kind of outside of downtown where we're looking for modest increases in density. I know the downtown vision report allows for towers, anywhere from 15 to 21 stories on some blocks, but that's not what we'll be really looking at for those corridors. It will be taller, and so we're working out exactly what it will be for those corridors. I know there's a lot of folks concerned, particularly Fleetwood. What there's been a lot of development along McQuestion, development at 42 Broad Street, and so we're going to be looking at those models and then looking at the rest of the neighborhood and trying to right size where and how dense would be appropriate. But we're going to be looking at more modest increases in density. Next question for safety and mobility. Were any streets identified for bicycle lanes? Gramerton is a bit narrow for it. Either?
So we did not come up with a bike plan for the city, right, as part of the comprehensive plan. But there are corridors that are more or less effective. But yes, the width of the street is very important. The parking on the street and also the use of the street. I mean, depending what the street is used for, there could be different solutions in different places. So no, we did not come up with a full plan for bike lanes throughout the whole city. That was just a little bit beyond the scope of this. But it's also very clear you have to respect what is already there. Yeah.
Thing you. Any plans for parking garages to be improved with better lighting and structural aesthetics improvement? Their discounted rate for Mount Vernon residents, former municipal lot in Fleetwood. We can't answer that latter question. The earlier question is we have intently looked at parking garages and parking lots for both improvements and developments. If you look at the downtown vision report, our parking garages and open air lots are development opportunities, but not development opportunities to eliminate parking, but to better utilize that space. Number one, to reconstruct the parking garages with mixed use development opportunities. So building housing and commercial along with replacing the garages and maybe even adding capacity to those, as well as the larger open air lots for development. Next question, neighborhood permitted parking might get people to start using parking lots as well, especially commuters who drive to neighborhoods parking. That's something I don't know if did we look at permitted parking?
I mean, we heard about it in the, I'll just say for my part, we heard about it in the outreach sessions quite a bit. And there were disagreements about whether it can be done or can't be done. We do know some communities that do it. I think, I'm not sure to what degree it's addressed in the plan, but certainly we heard about it a lot.
This is Mayor Howard. We did check on permitted parking with the state of New York. It is something that would have to be designated by the state. That is not something that we could do on our own as a city. And we definitely were looking at permitted parking, especially around transit hubs, as we know a lot of commuters come in. So we've been looking for solutions around that, but that's not something that the city can designate on its own. It would have to go through the state. And I believe there are only 2 communities in the state of New York that have permitted parking at all. So, it is something that we have looked at to bring in revenue as well as to protect our residential neighborhoods close to transit-oriented spaces from just being overwhelmed by commuters.
Yeah, I mean, the closest one near you that I know has it is Tarrytown. There's a section of Tarrytown that has resident only parking where there's the sticker they get in their windshield. I don't know how it functions, but they have it, as the mayor said, near their train station where, the community didn't want to be overwhelmed and then not have a place to go when they get home. So,
Yeah, thank you, man. Continuing with parking, regarding off-street parking, if anything, many new housing developments have not provided enough off-street parking. Reduce the required amount, would be a problem in many neighborhoods. So in terms of reducing parking requirements, we're primarily, focusing that, surrounding the Metro North stations. We, Pat actually, did the Mount Vernon West, transitory development zone and the downtown vision report around Mount Vernon East, does reduce parking capacity, because when you have higher density around the train station, often less parking is required. We don't intend that for other neighborhoods to significantly reduce it, but we might reimagine it so it's appropriate depending on specifically what neighborhood it is, because it's kind of uniform across the board, and so we wanted to make it more balanced in more residential neighborhoods.
And just all, James, to follow on that, the parking regulations with respect to some of our business uses are antiquated. So I went to Staples the other day on Stanford Boulevard. There were 4 cars in the parking lot. It was in the middle of the day. People order stuff online. They don't drive to Staples to buy pens anymore. So that's an example of a parking regulation that needs updating and right sizing.
Next question is regarding reducing single family zoning, ADUs, and uniform parking requirements. I think we addressed all of those things. We're not eliminating single family zoning. We're just looking for certain opportunities that may allow for a more variety of housing in those neighborhoods. And it won't be uniform parking rules across the city. Quick comment, all neighborhoods must have green space, not just certain areas. Absolutely. And we're, looking for opportunities, and especially downtown, where we've looked for at imposing infrastructure fees, which my intent was to have that focused on open space, but allow for other improvements as well. And we've been speaking with developers who have already put proposals forth, and there has been money set aside for infrastructure landscaping improvements. Next question is actually about landscape beautification program. Noted, and we concur with the sponsorship model where local businesses adopt and maintain designated areas. Thank you. Storefront signage design guidelines, yes. Another parking question: has perpendicular and angle parking been considered where space permits? Ample parking is needed to provide businesses for our commercial spaces. Peter, you want to answer that?
I don't think it was specifically analyzed.
There was a little bit of a discussion about this and some analysis. It's all about geometry. When you angle a space, it actually gets deeper into the traveled aisleway because of the angle of the space. So it's really all about geometry. And there are potentially opportunities to do it, but it's not a panacea, and we have to look carefully at it.
And I think that all comes back to kind of the place by place analysis that has to be done. Same with kind of loading zones for Amazon and FedEx, right? It's not everywhere, but there may be opportunities for these different solutions to actually work together.
Great, thank you. So I'm just letting everyone know, time check, it is 8 p.m. right now. We have still no more questions, comments. I ask people to pause their questions and comments for now, just so we can get through what we have and be respectful of everyone's time here. Next comment: love the idea of expanding home ownership. Very important. Have more homeowners, be they smaller homes, co-ops, condos, multifamily options. Absolutely, that's something we are pushing, is more diverse home ownership opportunities. And when developers come in, especially with larger parcels, we push the idea of having at least a portion of it set aside from home ownership. And we've actually had at least 3 developers saying they would consider it or that they would like to pursue that. Another question about ADUs and removing barriers to do that. As I said, we're looking at how ADUs can be incorporated properly into the city. It's going to be a longer discussion. Incentives for developers putting up multifamily residential should not include pilots. I know the mayor likes that comment. Comment to Adam, high percentage of homes are rentals and not owner occupied. The school district is stronger. The city would attract homeowners who can afford and support homes in the original intent. Thumbs up regarding city departments. What more incentives would developers receive? We could leverage incentives to secure quality of life improvements.
Yeah, I think I answered that one.
Yeah.
It's pretty typical, just for everyone who didn't see my answer there. For the, let's call it 10 to 15 cities and villages we have in the town that have in the region that have done a lot of RFEI so far, it's fairly common when there's a contract for that transfer of the land between the municipality and the developer, that in that contract, it outlines things like the developer would have to use a certain percentage of total labor from the local labor force in that city or in that village, or that they also have to do improvements to the public realm in the immediate area of that parcel, or they have to provide some major placemaking benefit. So because the city's in the driver's seat, they can make certain requests and requirements of the person who ultimately gets that parcel. It's another feature that makes that a particularly strong component of economic development for you.
Thank you, Adam. I agree with everything in the slide. It's needed basic management activities. How is this implemented and who owns this? I'm not sure people are sold. There's a ton of people, government, who can execute management. I think you've addressed that. And question on what is the definition of burden community? Depends on the topic. But generally, when we talk about environmental and social justice, it's community from an environmental standpoint that is overburdened by toxic uses. That's whether the high presence of industrial uses mixed with housing, or a lot of communities have been put upon, just like with infrastructure such as highways being built through it. Also, a burdened community could mean that there's an oversaturation in certain types of uses, such as everything from methadone clinics to supportive services, that even though there may be a need in that community, often when a need is identified in a community, it's automatically just labeled as a community of need. And so all those kind of social services go into that neighborhood. So those are some definitions of burdened community. There was a comment regarding city being path towards density, and the discussion took place. So folks read that discussion. I'll just skip over that. It's a good conversation. Companies in industrial areas should be encouraged to hire local. Absolutely, we do that, and we will continue to promote that as our IDA negotiates with the businesses, communities. City-owned properties are low-hanging fruit that could be symbolic and emblematic of where the city is headed. Yes, this is something we have thought about intently. The comptroller is, in charge of a lot of our what's called in-rem properties. Those are properties that we took over, either through eminent domain or just liens for failure to pay taxes. And so we are looking at strategies for that, and that's why some of the zoning around the downtown in particular is being zoned for certain densities, so we can assemble our properties and be in control of what to be like the beacon for what is the potential for downtown and other areas. Next comment, children need something to do after school programs, after school jobs, sports, absolutely. And I think our youth bureau does a great job of that, but we're open to new programs and ideas. Comment about the charter review committee, I won't go into, that's separate initiative, but about a change in the type of government management. Churches should be included in plans. They've always been a great resource. Absolutely. That's why most of our community conversations took place in houses of worship, because they have been great partners and continue to be. And a lot of them have community development corporations, which do activities to help implement the comp plan. A comment directly to me regarding public library presenting a bond proposal to acquire 101 Summit Avenue. Former home E.B. White. I happen to have an opinion on how the acquisition might fit into the comprehensive plan. Not a specific opinion, but that is something we have discussed a lot and has been highlighted as a need for historic preservation in the city. There are just Pat talked about specific neighborhoods, but there are definitely a handful of properties that are at the forefront in terms of this is why we need historic district or some type of landmarking landmarks commission for not only preservation but adaptive reuse like this. So I think it would be a great use for it if we can find the money to do that. Next comment is disappointed. No mention of Mount Vernon Avenue, a major access point. What is planned to improve this neighborhood? Actually, there is a plan. That was the Mount Vernon West TOD. It's just kind of what we've noticed there is, the property, a lot of property owners there are just kind of like, no, you first, no, you first. But there are plans before us moving forward, particularly around McQuestion Parkway. There's a lot of activity being proposed, but we are seeing a project or two farther down Mount Vernon Avenue. There's actually one before a zoning board near where Lincoln, Stevens, and Mount Vernon Avenue meet. So to add an extra half story to that. So hopefully that will be a catalyst for development along the corridor. Next, is it typical for a comp plan for a small city adjacent to a major city to focus on youth employment with its borders? Joanne's used to identify so strongly with our city. Adam answered that. No, it's not typical of a comp plan. But as I mentioned, we do have a very active, robust youth bureau, and we do coordinate with them on that. And there was an answer for the E.B. White on very Summit Avenue. So scrolling down, what is the current rental usage of the buildings of McQuestion? That was answered by, hello, Nick, the property owner for at least one of the properties. So I don't know about the McQuestions, but we could look into that. Did I miss the response to CCTV being installed? No, but it's noted as something we could consider. Next comment, I go to Staples to Sanford Boulevard all the time, different amounts, and there's a healthy amount of cars. At the lots will be completely full in 3 weeks when it's back down to school. CVS. Okay, thank you for that comment. Provide tax relief statements. There should be community benefits agreements requiring developers to purchase city-owned property to allocate percentage of work to Mount Vernon-based businesses, et cetera, et cetera. Adam did answer you, but we're actually considering for city property specifically more of the lease model, so the city maintains some control over that. So to answer your question, this is one of the reasons, because too often we'll sell it for what seems to be a best available price, but does not account for inflation for how long these buildings are over time. I will bypass the city manager because that's a charter review question. Neighborhood permitted parking, that was addressed already. So now, Mount Vernon has 3 empty schools. If dense city is going to be more dense, won't there be a need in the future? Adam addressed that question, but that's something to consider and look at. Thank you. for the,
Hey, James, I just want to add something on that real
Sure.
quick. The average size of the family across the region has shrunk significantly. And we are seeing developments all across the region, sometimes multi-hundreds of units at a time. I'll give you an example from the town where I live. We just built 250 units of housing. We got 11 kids out of it. So this is not, the 1990s or the 1980s where large housing developments yield large quantities of kids. It's just not happening. And there's a lot of reasons for that we could go through another time. But there are things the school district can and should do based on other models across the region that have worked about getting those buildings into a process to repurpose them so that they continue to serve the community in a beneficial way, as you try to build some housing to stabilize your school population losses as a baseline goal for now.
Thank you, Adam. Now we're at the end. Last couple of comments. One is about the limiting of churches in the city because it affects the city's tax base. That is considering, a saturation, not denying because, it's called RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use Law, does place restrictions on municipalities from preventing houses of worship from opening. So there's only so much you can do with that. And final comment, why can't we pause development until the comp plan gets adopted to prevent such things as development not in line with the plan? The answer is because we did. So when, right before I started, we had 3 new city council members come in at the time. That was 2022. And they ran on a platform of a moratorium on development until the comp plan is adopted. Now, that does not mean we did not build anything in that time. We allowed our land use boards to function as normal, our planning board, zoning board, and architectural review board. So there might have seen some development occur throughout the city, and development that was built as of right, which means in accordance with existing zoning, was allowed to take place. But that was another reason we did a phased development, because there was a lot of interest downtown and a lot of pressure. And so we wanted to address downtown and that pressure first, since that's the desire for the activity to take place. And there was a desire to see, downtown get back on its feet. And so we addressed that first. And so we did not allow for development until the downtown development report, downtown vision plan was adopted by the city council, which is the first phase. And the rest of the city, we did not encourage development as per the city council dictum that we do not permit development that would be out of character with the future comp plan. So I'd like to thank everyone. Thanks to all of you who showed up today. We reached close to 70 people here. We had 47 people show up on Saturday. So that's, over 100 people who participated in the presentation of the plan. Just to reiterate, our consultant team, which I give kudos to them for a great job presenting this, we'll spend the next month taking all these comments and incorporating. And then in the fall, right after Labor Day, we'll be submitting a draft plan to City Council. And then we will have at City Council discretion, public hearings for that, and be referred to Planning Board, Westchester County Planning Board, and then be adopted by the City Council before the end of the year. We're targeting October, November for that. So I'd just like to, again, thanks all of you for participating. Check out envisionmountvernon.com, envisionmtvernon.com to get regular updates on what's happening over the next few months. So thank you to our elected officials, our Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you to my team for helping, always burning the midnight oil with us. And if there's any comments or questions, you can contact the planning department at 914-40-4029. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic evening and hope to see you at the city planning public hearings. City council public hearings in the fall. Take care.
See everybody.
Night all.
That's not. Um.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Have a great night.
Informative. Thank you.